Okay, we're live now.
Yeah.
I know Katie isn't here. Well, Katie is here. She's
Lurking. Thank you.
Katie. Katie, I'm going to start the webinar, so we'll see attendees start to join as well.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you.
Well, we're recording this now, but I'll still say it's good to see you, Leah. Your name was brought up in a very fond way the other day by Sean Campbell.
Good. Better be fond. That's what I say.
and you know, happy you're joining us tonight.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have the opportunity. This is something, obviously this is an issue that is important throughout industrial New York City. So I think we're all glad to be able to have that conversation, with other folks.
Great. Have you been playing music?
No, here, I'll show you. There are the guitars just sitting in the corner, collecting dust.
Sorry to hear that.
What are you gonna do? Maybe soon. It's like I said, we've been
You'll get back to it.
working so hard, and it's really just leveling out now, and I feel like I might be able to do things.
Good. So,
I don't know
no
where
attendees. That's interesting. I'm sorry?
I don't know where my IJC people are at. 6 on the dot. Where are they? Let's go.
I have no attendees yet. That's strange too. I wonder if people are having problems tonight.
I'm just looking for a few names, so I'll just wait to get started. I had a couple of folks on the committee who said they couldn't make it. So
Okay.
let's see.
Katie, when you are ready to start, though, just tell me to call roll.
Okay, great. Give it another second.
Okay, at least we have one attendee. That means people are able to join that way, thankfully.
Okay, let's see. We have, great. Okay, why don't we, yeah, and I had some folks who had messaged. We can do roll. Thank you, Jeremy.
Good evening, everybody. I am going to mute everyone but myself. And then I am going to call roll. I am only going to call committee members. If you are a board committee members, when I call your name, please unmute yourself, acknowledge your name, and then mute yourself again. Board members, if you are not a committee member, I am not going to call your name, but I am going to write your name down, including our newest board member who has joined us this evening, Samuel Breitbart. Let's start with Catherine Walsh.
Present.
Thank you. Nick Azadian. Nick? He must have stepped away. We'll get back to him. Gladys Bruno. Cynthia Felix. John Fontillis. Cynthia Gonzalez. Christina Lem. Sam Sierra. I know Sam is here but stepped away. We'll call his name again as we're going to call Nick. Nick Azadian.
Present.
Thank you. Cesar Zuniga.
Present.
Thank you. And I'll give Sam Sierra another chance.
Hi, good evening. I'm present. I stepped away. My apologies.
Thank you. No problem, Sam. Katie, roll is called. I am going to write down the name of board members who are not committee members.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, and I did have a couple of declines. It's like graduation week for many, so it's continued into this week for this timing. So great, thank you so much. We have a lot of folks listed as panelists, so there's a mix of board members, but I will just get started to say, Katie Walsh, I'm the chair of this committee. We are we have been meeting for over a year. So this is a special committee that formed specifically on the last mile trucking issue. We kicked off last May, but to say that we as a community in Sunset Park, Community Board 7, have been talking about this issue for a very long time. So much so that it moved us to respond to this epidemic of the issue related to trucking and traffic and trucks and the epidemic of people being killed on our streets, of the asthma rates and air pollution, so much so to such an acute level and severity that we created a special subcommittee to look at last mile trucking issues. So we formed last May. We've been meeting. I really want to call out and recognize the community board members who are on the community board and then serving on this committee along with others who've been showing up really consistently. We first met last May, and we actually then were joined by quite a lot of Community Board 6 members. So this is Red Hook, who are, our neighbors. We share a lot of the political district as well, political lines, representation, elected representation, and they joined that meeting as well. And we heard an outpouring of concerns. And this is really at an, again, elevated pitch for issues that have been going on for a very long time. But really the recognition of how it's only worsening. And it's only worsening with e-commerce rise and demand, and how these trucking facilities are being cited and as of right facilities in our communities. In July of last year, we had the Department of City Planning and the Department of Transportation come to our meeting, outlining what we had heard from our community residents, outlining what we had heard in the meeting as well from Red Hook residents, from Community Board 6, and outlining the issues, outlining the problems, asking what could be done. What could the agencies themselves see as ways of solutions and orientation towards that? We heard a few different things. Again, a reiteration that these are as of right facilities. There isn't any current legislation or regulation that would kind of change behavior. There are incentives in terms of changing behavior, but really, the way that legislation, coding, zone ordinance is written is again, it the setup is there. The way the framework is written allows for these type of facilities. But we did hear about, in that July meeting, we again heard from Department of City Planning about what special text zoning amendments are. There was a little bit of a roadmap that we heard from the Department of City Planning, just in terms of understanding what would need to change if there was going to be a conversation about changing something about last mile trucking facilities. Again, so that was in July. We also had elected representation in that July meeting. We had a representative who will speak here today. At the top of the agenda is really like updates, and then we have legislative updates. But we also had elected representation from the state and from the state Assemblymember Marcela Mateñas's office around understanding what state level regulation could exist, and that was the beginning of an outline. We had Chief of Staff Jenny Chang, who's here, who started to outline, these are some of the things that we're identifying and we're exploring as we're trying to, understand this issue and introduce potential solutions. So there was an invitation from their office to join some further up follow-on research meetings and policy meetings. When the committee came back together in October, there was a introduction by the state representative's office in October of this past year of what was then, shortly introduced not long after, which was the indirect source rule. So this has now been introduced at the state level, and really we are going to hear an update from Jenny today about where that stands, given the legislative window is closing tomorrow. But the indirect source rule, to say that we would create there would be an overall framework that could possibly regulate some of these facilities in a different kind of way. In the October meeting, though, we also heard from many of the organizations that are represented today, what then formalized and became the Last Mile Coalition. So there was representation at every one of these meetings around concerns, the environmental justice implications of trucking, last mile facilities, traffic safety, asthma, all of the above, and an exploration of what could be introduced at the city level. And so that's when we started to hear from the Last Mile Coalition about different tools and different mechanisms at the city level. What the Community Board 7 did in December at our full Community Board meeting is this committee had written a letter outlining all the concerns, outlining all the challenges of things that we had heard. And we brought that to the full community board in December. And that was unanimously, a letter that basically called on our state and our congressional and our city and our agencies representation to take action and to look at this. And so that was, again, signed off in December by the full community board, and that letter started to go out. So it was issued by our chairperson, Cesar Zuniga, who's on today, and it went out to representatives, agencies early in the new year. So there's been a steady stream of follow-up that's come in from Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez's office, Yvette Clark, senators. We've heard from the assembly members, in addition to Marcela Mateñas, Bobby Carroll, Diane Savino, Brooklyn Borough President, Antonio Reynoso. There's been interest and follow-up from the Attorney General's office, Leticia's office, around understanding what is actually happening related to these last mile trucking facilities. So there is a growing recognition, obviously, of the challenges that we're facing, but that this is not a Community Board 7 alone issue, but this really is something that is impacting all of us. But we are looking at all of the tools in the toolbox to solve this issue. And so that brings me to where we stand today, which is that there was a committee meeting a couple of weeks ago where the Last Mile Coalition introduced the special text amendment. The special text amendment kind of tackling this issue of what would need to change by way of zoning. They're going to talk a little bit more about it tonight to reorient everybody. And in that meeting, in our committee meeting, we took a vote, and we took a vote to support the special text amendment to bring it to the full community board once we had legal counsel, once we had legal review. So that was what the committee voted on a couple of weeks ago, and we brought it to the Community Board 7. Community Board 7 had our full meeting on May 18th. And at that meeting, earlier that day, we had received a letter from Jesse Solomon, who will also speak today, outlining some responses from the special text amendment and we'll discuss that further about the special text amendment in response. So the community board itself decided, there was kind of a discussion, and we didn't take a vote at that meeting. We did not take a vote in the full community board meeting on May 18th on the special text amendment, but we will be taking a vote on it in our June meeting. And that's like right around the corner. It's on June 15th. So that's why it was so urgent and timely to make sure that we were bringing everybody in, because this again, just where I started, this has been ongoing, long conversation in the acuteness of knowing it's a problem, and we're looking for all the tools in the toolbox to take action and have solutions. Bringing us to today. So I realize usually I come with like a PowerPoint slide that shows the agenda, and today I'm just going to verbally say that taking stock, we are I'm going to turn to any legislative updates. So I've recapped for everybody kind of where we are, bringing up to speed. I'm going to do any legislative updates that we have. So we both have the state office and the city office is here. Then I'm going to go to the Last Mile Coalition. I know that there's that just in terms of offering context of the special text amendment. And then Jesse, I'm going to defer to you a bit to kind of help understand and facilitate how you want to go to the next section for the Jobs Coalition. And then we'll have a discussion for Community Board 7. For what it's worth, I've said this, but I'll just kind of say it again. So we are gathering, we're gathering information today, and the responsibility, what's incumbent upon us, is that by way of this meeting, we said that we made the commitment that this committee would bring this back to the full board to help to inform the vote that happens in June. So a lot of this today is around better understanding, listening, and then responsibility, incumbency on myself and others in the community and the community board to then be able to bring that and communicate that to the June meeting, and that's where the vote will happen. There's no vote happening tonight. I spoke a lot. I usually try not to speak at length so much at the top, but I know that there's a lot of new people who are here, so it felt important to do that. I would ask a couple of things when it's your turn to speak. Do introduce yourself. I'm quite interested if you feel comfortable self-identifying, if you live in Community Board 7, that would be really good. If you could say, if you live in Community Board 7, maybe you work in Community Board 7, but if you live in Community Board 7, air travels and trucks travel, but we're a community board, so we represent a place. And tonight we're talking about a place. This is not a concept. This is not a policy debate. This is about people's lived experiences, and this is about people's daily lives. And so we're really trying to tackle an issue. So we'd really like to know if you're a Community Board 7 resident. And then the other thing I would say is that we'll have Last Mile Coalition, and then turn to Jobs Coalition, and then there are several Community Board 7 members. I will give them deference to ask questions and to follow up, and committee members as well. But then we'll have some time for public comment as well, and public comment questions. And we'll try and get everyone out the door at a reasonable hour. So we do have the benefit of having our chair on, Cesar Zuniga. So Cesar, I did just want to ask if you wanted to add anything else before I open up to legislative updates.
Thank you, Katie. I think just quickly, first of all, thank you for all the work that you've been doing and the leadership. And I guess secondly, I just want to emphasize that we are very committed to finding solutions to what is a huge problem in our district. And I think sometimes solutions aren't perfect, and sometimes we have to kind of acknowledge that good enough is good enough. And so, I think we made a real commitment to addressing this, to finding solutions. We made a commitment to making sure that that we were going to work with stakeholders to try to move the needle on this. And we also made a commitment to listen. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to listen, because we, as a community board, we acknowledge that we represent a cross section of stakeholders, and sometimes that cross section of stakeholders aren't on the same page or have differing perspectives. And our work is to try to, give everyone a voice and allow their voices to be heard, and then make our decisions in the best interest of, I think what Katie just said is right, of a place that for most of us is home. So we are happy to listen, but we are very committed to acting after we've listened. Thank you, Katie.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much. I will now, let's see, I'm just gonna, great. Okay. I see both Jenny and Christina. So I'm going to ask them, Jenny, if you want to go first and provide any updates state level, and then city, just leave it to you, Christina.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. So I'm just going to go ahead in terms of updates since we last spoke on the indirect source rule. It has been formally introduced. It is currently sitting in the Environmental Conservation Committee in the New York State Assembly. This bill has been gaining co-sponsors. We're up to 9. I believe 3 are members of the Environmental Conservation Committee. And what our office has been really focused on is a process of kind of power mapping the remaining members of the Environmental Conservation Committee, doing some research around, which facilities exist within their districts, where they've been on environmental regulation in the past. And then, session is ending tomorrow, just in case people didn't know. The New York State Legislature is probably going to convene for the last time this year tomorrow. In light of that, we did not introduce this bill expecting to pass it in the same session. That is very rare, especially when it's introduced on the later side of the session. The plan was always to kind of hit the ground running really hard between, next year, but doing that prep work between now and next year, which entails going to other legislators, trying to get co-sponsorship. That can still happen in between sessions, even when the legislature is out of session. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. I do want to kind of talk about, I know that there's, a remainder of this meeting dedicated to addressing the city zoning text amendment and some concerns that have come up since the previous meeting. I do want to kind of talk about the indirect source rule in relation to the city zoning text amendment. So both these pieces of legislation, were worked with in conjunction with the Last Mile Coalition that will speak later. Earth Justice and other organizations that are in the coalition were a critical part to helping develop the indirect source rule. And from our office perspective, these 2 pieces of legislation really do work kind of hand in hand. They address a similar universe, mainly last mile facilities. They address this universe and this problem that we've been seeing through different mechanisms, different regulatory mechanisms. And since the beginning, since we started talking about the indirect source rule, every time people would ask us, well, what about zoning? Can the state do anything about zoning? And unfortunately, it is really only the city that has jurisdiction over it. So it always seemed evident to us that while the indirect source rule is kind of a critical step in the direction of regulating these facilities, it is really the zoning text amendment that is the most critical piece. In addition to that, we're trying to develop a campaign plan for the indirect source rule, which involves kind of organizing in not just our district, but the districts of some of these other legislators, particularly powerful legislators that may be able to help move this bill. As a part of that, we really want to develop a campaign plan that works in conjunction with the city zoning text amendment. So really just want to stress, I'm looking forward to hearing the discussion that ensues after these preliminary updates. But really want to stress that these are two pieces of legislation. These are two regulatory interventions that were designed to work hand in hand. And I'm hopeful that, for the indirect source rule, we worked in conjunction with SBIDC and the Industrial Jobs Coalition to just make sure that there wouldn't be any inadvertent impacts, indirect impacts on some of the, smaller businesses, industrial businesses, that is not the intent of targeting, that we didn't intend on targeting through the indirect source rule. So I'm hopeful that we can get to a similar place with the city zoning text amendment. I'm hopeful that we can start that campaign planning very soon and really start to kind of grow support around both of these measures hand in hand. So I hope that answers what you needed from me, Katie, but happy to answer any questions as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. And this was really meant to be kind of a quick check-in. So thank you, because you've come to the most recent meeting as well. Christina, anything that you'd like to?
Sure, yeah. So, I think the last time Christina Bottego with Councilmember Avilas's office, sorry about that. So I think last time I came and spoke at the Last Mile Committee, I talked about the legislation, the licensure legislation we were working on. There was sort of a push-pull that was happening at council. We thought we had overcome the internal obstacles and were able to introduce the legislation in June. But unfortunately, it looks like we're back in the same position. So it doesn't appear as though we will have opportunity to introduce in June. And, similar to Jenny, we're closing out the session end of June. So July and August will be break. But what we are going to do in the coming week is basically just re-strategize, come up with a campaign similar to what Jenny described. And we're going to use the summer to really just do a boots on the ground approach. So whatever it takes, knocking on doors, doing some power mapping, and we will turn to our advocates to help us design and develop that plan. But hopefully you hear from us within the next week or two on what that plan looks like. And then just quickly, in terms of the text amendment, I'm sure you all know that Alexa is signed on to the text amendment. We're in conversation with folks. We have a follow-up conversation planned with SBIDC, I believe, next week. We're here to listen to the conversation and learn and take notes. But same as Jenny said, I think we feel hopeful that we can get to a place where we are in agreement on this. And the text amendment, does feel like a critical piece, and it's a tool in the toolbox. So we have to employ every method. And I look forward to hearing the conversation.
That's great. Thank you, Christina. Appreciate it. Good. So I will, I'm about to hop over to Last Mile Coalition, but I do want to give any of the committee members and the community board, if there's anything that you wanted to offer before we jumped in. And the way I'll know is that you'll put your hand up. Otherwise, if I don't see any hands up from the committee members, I will get started. Okay. I don't see any hands. Great. Okay, so next up on the agenda is I will call on Kevin Garcia, and then he will, if you can introduce yourself, and then if there's any other members that you want to introduce, if you have a slide deck. I don't know if you do, Kevin, but the call and the ask was just to kind of bring us up to speed on the special text, and then we'll go from there.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie. And thank you all for having us here. So as Katie mentioned, my name is Kevin Garcia. I'm the transportation planner with the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. And we're a citywide membership network, and for 30 years have linked grassroots organizations from low-income neighborhoods and communities of color in the struggle for environmental justice. But we're also a part of the Last Mile Coalition, which launched in December 2021, so about 6 months ago. And with me today, we have two of our other coalition members, and I welcome them to unmute and introduce themselves. So first we have Summer Sandoval, and she's with Uprose. And we also have Hillary Aiden with Earth Justice. So, tonight, what we really want to spend time doing is, talking about what the problem statement is, talking about the problem, talking about the intent with the zoning text amendment, special permit process, and the outcomes we hope to find and achieve with this special permit process. To talk about the problem, I'm going to pass that over to Summer.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us tonight. Thank you so much, Katie, for giving that awesome and really thorough overview of everything. I don't want to be repetitive, so I'm going to just add some additional context in terms of the coalition and kind of intro some specific points to the zoning text amendment, and then I'll hand it back over to Kevin. So I guess to go along with what's been shared thus far, this subcommittee has been in existence for over a year, and we've been active members, from its inception. As Kevin said, the formal coalition made its public launch in December of 21. And with that, in correlation with that launch was the announcement that we were going to be working together to explore and develop the zoning text amendment. I want to say starting as early as the November meeting, so the meeting right before the formal launch, we had, and we've been sharing updates, case studies, research, information, public comment throughout, I believe at every single one of the meetings, special subcommittee meetings since its launch, really keeping people in the loop in terms of gathering feedback from the committee, from public comments and what the community has shared of what are the top concerns in terms of health, safety, impacts on small businesses, livability, pedestrian safety, environmental impacts, all of these different concerns and impacts from various stakeholders from this, the space that CB7 has, thankfully created last year. And just wanting to add, so that the zoning text amendment has really been, something that we're not really creating the wheel from zero, but it has been really built off of models and similar strategies that has been done in different municipalities in different states across the country, because even though this is a New York City wide issue, this isn't, specific to New York City. This is something, the rise and unregulated development of fulfillment centers is something that is really felt and seen across the country in many cities. And so what we're doing here is really so important as, we are building momentum and further developing models that has been really tried and tested in other places before, but really coming from the framework of shared values. And that those shared values are to protect industrial spaces, to support and protect industrial businesses, and to really also make way for the really broad creation of those good paying, family sustaining, local accessible industrial jobs. And really seeing this overwhelming and unregulated market of fulfillment centers really being in direct threat to those shared values that we all have expressed in one form or another in this space and others. So really that is what the spirit, in which this zoning text amendment is created off of. And in addition to being informed by many stakeholders and models that have already been, I think we're also happy to share the slides that really have went through all of these updates that we presented at the last subcommittee meeting. So I'm just kind of reiterating some of that information. But then I guess before I turn over to Kevin, just lastly wanting to say that, really just kind of clarifying again the ask of CB7 that, you all played such important role in creating this space and creating this dialogue and creating this really, this opportunity to really work collectively on this issue that we're all facing. And the ask is to join this application as a co-applicant along with 7 other co-applicants that span from our local electeds to respective community-based organizations in very impacted communities that include, Sunset Park, Red Hook, South Bronx, North Brooklyn, these industrial areas, environmental justice communities that are really bearing the brunt of this issue. And so really just, hoping, that you'll really consider this request to join us as a co-applicant. That in that request, really having the opportunity in that specific seat at the table with, as we're about to embark on further negotiations and conversations with the Department of City and Planning on how to really build something that works for all of us. Thank you, and I will pass it over to Kevin.
Thank you so much, Summer. And we have met with DCP, and we did have a pretty positive meeting with them. And they're ready to continue having the conversation once we do submit the application. So as Summer said, we are looking for Community Board 7 to join as a co-applicant, but the application is ready to go. And to go over the application, provide an overview of what the goals are before I jump into the outcomes, I'm going to pass that over to Hillary. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hillary Adu, and I'm an attorney at Earth Justice. And I'll just echo my partners. Thanks for including us in this, and thank you for the work that you all have been doing on this issue for so long. I'll just give a brief overview because we have discussed the text amendment before. So as you all know, this is a proposal to require a special permit for any last mile warehouse in the city. And last mile warehouse is defined under the proposal as a warehouse that has at least 50,000 square feet of total floor space used for warehouse activities, and that has as its primary purpose the temporary storage and redistribution of e-commerce retail goods by receiving shipments from one mode of transport and redistributing goods via a vehicle with a rated capacity of less than 10,000 pounds. So this is a definition that's based on other definitions of last mile facilities or fulfillment centers that we have seen in other zoning ordinances around the country, and also based on the definition in the ISR bill, as Jenny discussed. And so we did develop this in concert with that effort, as Jenny mentioned. And the goal of the proposed amendment is really to require some planning and some review for these facilities. As you all know, right now they are permitted as of right, meaning there's no environmental review or public participation or even public notice and an opportunity for people to be aware that these facilities are coming to their communities. So the special permit requirement would create the need for the uniform land use review procedure, allowing for participation by the public, by community boards, by others, as well as environmental review. And then there are a few proposed conditions and requirements that seek to address the particular concerns that these facilities raise. One of them is clustering. As you all know, the concern that these facilities tend to be sited close to each other and also close to sensitive receptors because they're very close to residential communities. So there would be a requirement that they be set back a certain distance, both from each other and from schools and parks and other sensitive receptors. And then there would be a number of requirements and conditions that are also imposed on similarly other uses that under the zoning resolution require a special permit, like a requirement that the Department of Health study whether the facility could increase local air pollution because of the truck traffic that it would induce, or similarly, a requirement that the Department of Transportation study whether the facility would cause an undue increase in congestion because of truck traffic. And then that would allow the Department of City Planning to make an informed decision about permitting and where these facilities belong. And then there are a few other tools that the proposal would give city planning to mitigate the effects of truck traffic around last mile facilities, like requiring alternative modes of transportation, such as e-bikes or electric trucks. So that's kind of an overview. I'm happy to speak to any of the other details or answer any other questions that might come up.
Thanks, Hillary. Yeah, so just want to reiterate some of the things that Hillary and Summer both mentioned. So, the zoning text amendment and the special permit process, would require review, evaluation, and regulation of this new industry that is consistent with the city's goals, right? So the special permit process can make streets safer and more accessible by allowing the city to plan for these facilities, taking into consideration the traffic and safety impacts with regards to the city's climate and environmental justice goals. The city's already planning or in the process of developing an environmental justice report and a plan, right? So the city's aiming to achieve carbon neutrality and address the health needs of all communities. So the special permit process would allow the city to address the greenhouse gases, and the other vehicle pollution, and also environmental disparities that are coming from these last mile facilities by promoting vehicle electrification and also the alternative modes of transportation that Hillary mentioned. And want to remind folks that a lot of these these warehouse operators, so like Amazon, Target, UPS, and others have already committed to greening their businesses, but we're just asking them to prioritize New York City and environmental justice communities here. I also want to address some of the concerns that were raised in the letter, but one of the major concerns was this potential surge of new facilities being proposed or built once the zoning text amendment application is submitted or approved, so that the developers can avoid the regulation. But I want to remind folks that these facilities are growing at a fast rate and can be built as of right. So we cannot, do anything to prevent them from being constructed right now. There's no public review process. DOT even mentioned that, they can't do anything because the facilities can be built as of right. So, right now, a lot of these developers are eating up all the good industrial jobs and jobs that, we want to see remain in our city. And, they're also outbidding, they're also being outbidded by these giant facilities, right? So I know this is Brooklyn, but, what we're hearing from the South Bronx, because this is a citywide issue, is that, a lot of plot of land is being purchased, bought up, based on speculation. So, one last thing about the clustering, with every regulation, this is bound to happen, right? We saw it happen with the hotels, right? But that does not mean that, we should not try to regulate them, right? And the sooner we submit this application, the sooner we can start, regulating, these facilities. One other concern that we heard was around jobs. But as Jenny mentioned, the zoning text amendment and, the indirect source rule, go hand in hand. So one piece of the indirect source rule is that, warehouse operators will be required to report the number of facilities the number of jobs at a facility, right? And the special permit process, as was mentioned earlier, is going to require a public review process, and this can allow for the public to call for better jobs, and this can include calling for, well-paying, good jobs, union jobs, and I know that's what we all want, right? So it's not necessarily preventing these facilities from being built, but also pushing them to be better neighbors. And there was one concern that was raised about, this zoning text amendment, special permit process capturing other uses. And for that, I'm going to pass it to Hillary before, we have our closing remarks. Yeah.
Thanks. So we, as I mentioned, crafted the language of the definition based on the definition of last mile facilities or fulfillment centers. There are a number of terms for these that we saw from other parts of the country and also in the ISR bill. And because it specifically refers to e-commerce retail goods, that language really targets facilities where goods are temporarily stored before being delivered to members of the public. So it should not include warehouses that are serving industrial businesses.
Thanks, Hillary. So, one last thing, last remarks, I promise. We want to make it clear that this does not prevent these facilities from being built. We're not trying to kill the industry. We're just trying to regulate them, right? So if a facility meets the requirements, the ones that were listed by Hillary, and that are presented in the zoning text amendment, then they should have no problem, building the facility. But what we're trying to do is push these warehouse operators to be better neighbors, right? This committee and this board has been working on this issue for over a year now, as Katie mentioned. DCP has promised a study for over a year. DOT has said that they cannot do anything because these facilities are being built as of right. But this application is ready to go. And once the application is submitted, there will be negotiations, taking place. And if, Community Board 7 joins as a co-applicant, you're guaranteed a seat at the table and can be a part of those negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you, Hillary and Summer and Kevin. And I know that, you'll be here for more questions and follow-up. So with that, I will turn to Jesse Solomon. Jesse, how would you like to introduce yourself and everybody who is here tonight?
Sure. I think at least everyone I can see knows me. I'm Jesse Solomon, the Executive Director at Southwest Brooklyn Industrial Development Corporation. I'm also joined by Michaela on our team. But I actually want to turn it over to Chris Walters, who's at ANHD and convenes our coalition and can provide a little bit of context on the Industrial Jobs Coalition.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, Katie and all. Thanks for having us on. So as Jesse said, I'm Chris Walters. I work for the Association for Neighborhood and Housing Development. I'm the Land Use Policy Coordinator. And we convene the Industrial Jobs Coalition, the IJC. So the IJC, we're a citywide alliance of community groups, policy advocates, and industrial service providers, again, including SBIDC and CB7, fighting to protect and preserve the manufacturing sector in New York City. And so between us, we've got a wealth of knowledge and experience on the needs of industrial business. And again, thanks for having us on. We, very much want to be part of the conversation on looking at all the tools, as you mentioned, Katie, for understanding and dealing with the impacts of last mile facilities. And to that end, we've been in close contact with Assemblymember Matanya's office on the indirect source rule legislation. We've met with them and have provided feedback. We have only recently become aware of the proposed zoning text amendment. And so we wanted to meet with you tonight to share some of our concerns on the significant unintended impacts, again, as Jenny made reference to, that this policy would have on industrial businesses. And just stressing, throughout the city, not just in CB7, given the nature of the zoning text amendment, which would apply to M1 and to M zones and C8 throughout the city. And also just to share some of our concerns, on the process as we understand it thus far, including hopefully getting to a shared understanding of what the process entails for moving the zoning text amendment forward. I think we're hoping that the CB would consider slowing this down to make sure that all the stakeholders throughout the city have the time to assess and build consensus on the best way to move forward. But I think I will turn it back to you, Jesse, and to hear from you and some of our other IJC members on what some of those specific concerns are.
Sure. And I forgot to say, I am a resident of CB7, Sunset Park. And tonight we also have, so just going over who's here from the Industrial Jobs Coalition, because there's a lot of us and only a few of our organizations were able to be here. And Chris, catch me if I miss people, but it's SBIDC, obviously ANHD, Bach Network, who represents multiple IBCs, including MASPETH, which, as probably a lot of you all know, MASPETH is another hub of a ton of last mile distribution centers, and SPIDC represents both Sunset Park, Gowanus, and Red Hook, and most of these centers are in Red Hook. And who am I missing, Chris?
Thanks,
IGC.
Jesse. And I'm sorry, I
Evergreen.
neglected to introduce. And we have Leah from Evergreen, North Brooklyn, the North Brooklyn IBZ. And also Brenda from the Greenpoint Manufacturing and Design Center, who build a manufacturing space throughout the city.
Yes, so both GMTC and Evergreen are both industrial developers as well, who provide affordable manufacturing space for awesome businesses in our city, all those job providers that you guys just talked about. So You all saw my letter at this point to Community Board 7 and right before the last Community Board meeting, I think the day before we met with Kevin and Summer, kind of just expressing the same concerns. Sounds like you all understand most of those concerns, at least from a high level, pretty well. But in my letter, I actually, didn't necessarily expect the community board to delay the vote, really just wanted to say, hey, IJC would love to be really actively involved in this conversation, given our experience passing the two most recent special permits for hotels and self-storage, which we saw as competing uses to the industrial sector that really put a lot of pressure on the market and limited industrial businesses' ability to purchase space in IBCs. Especially, we were successful in that many-year-long fight to get those two special permits passed, and we're all, I think, incredibly proud of that. It really built a lot of cohesion in our group, in our coalition, and beyond. And as Chris mentioned, that process involved us talking to close to every single community board in New York City and trying to get their buy-in, because that's what it took really to get that passed, because the community boards actually have such a massive role in really sending a clear message to the city that this is, this particular zoning text amendment is so important. And so, yes, we've got the high level concerns that I outlined in my letter. And Kevin, you kind of mentioned a really core one, at least for SBIDC, this notion that once a special permit application is announced, it will cause massive speculation in the market, not just for developers buying sites prime for last mile, but others as well. That's just a fact. We've seen it now many times happen. And it's interesting, right? Because we've got a signal from Amazon and some of these companies saying we are actually oversaturated with space, but then we've also got developers who are saying we want to buy more space. So it's a particularly interesting moment in the conversation there. And then we also do have, a concern over the jobs. I mean, it's interesting. I think we have, obviously there's a lot of warehouse jobs that aren't great jobs, but we've also seen really high wages that are being led by this sector. So that's another concern we have, especially I think for some of the other industrial business zones in the city that, whether it's JFK, MassPet, et cetera, that, this is really an important industry in that particular area. So let me pause there and maybe turn it over to some of my colleagues. And I should also add, we would love this to be kind of more of a back and forth with everyone. Like, we can ask questions and you guys can ask questions of us. We thought it was important, for us to share some of that history working on the two special permits, especially for the community board and the other co-applicants, Nisha, Uprose, et cetera, to hear what that experience was like. Great. So yeah, let me move it over to, I don't know if Leah, Ryan, Brenda, any of you want to chime in to kick us off with questions, or Daryl, I know it's on too.
I'll jump in. I guess, we, this is, so my name is Leah Archibald and I run a local development corporation up in North Brooklyn that works with businesses in industrial North Brooklyn. So we're community boards 1 and part of 4. And, so it's Williamsburg, East Williamsburg, Bushwick, basically. And we have a totally different kind of building stock in North Brooklyn. We've got smaller buildings. So it's kind of a different thing. We're not like, like a MassBeth or a Red Hook where there's like big giant lots for like a UPS to develop. So I always felt like this wasn't going to be our concern. This isn't our problem. Except for like, now it kind of is turning into our problem. It's really, I was personally shocked, but you've got last mile distribution facilities on the sorts of footprints that I never would have imagined. 5,000 square feet, 10,000 square feet. So there's no industrial neighborhood that is immune from the proliferation of last mile. Now, so I think we all kind of have a dog in this fight in the big picture. Now, what I will share with you is my concerns about the zoning text amendment. Like, first of all, this isn't like a rezoning like in CB4 or CB6 or anything, right? A zoning text amendment de facto is for the whole city, right? So I think it's really important to understand that, although you guys, are hoping to be the applicant on this, this isn't something for just Community Board 7. Every single industrial neighborhood in New York City is going to be subject to whatever text you guys develop. So I think it's really, really important to make sure that you've gathered as much input as possible before you move forward, really for your own, for the sake of your own goals, right? And so I mentioned that because there's a couple of things in here, just looking, at the text. I'm personally very concerned with the way that it's written. I know, because I believe that even though your intent is not to scoop up or warehouse distributors that happen to have 50,000 square feet or more of space that are not doing last mile, I believe that the language is broad enough that it could easily scoop them up. And really, the last thing we want to do is to hurt, the sorts of businesses we work with that are like, food distributors and the like. So the first thing I would raise is I'm real concerned that this is airtight when it comes to that, in a way that, when I look at that state legislation with the same lens, I felt like the state legislation was airtight. I felt like it's pretty clear because you're only regulating the activity, right? The company. When you've got a land use issue, it's like the underlying zoning plus something else layered on top of it. And that's a lot harder for DCP and for the city to manage. It's like they don't do multidimensional so great. And that's what makes multidimensional somewhat worrisome, from my perspective. And then one last concern I would add is, when I look at what one must do to get a special permit, I think this is pretty hard to comply with. For example, I'm looking at the text, for any last mile warehouse located in SMIA, 80% of deliveries to and from shall be conducted by marine transport. But there's, like, if we're just talking about this area in waterfront Brooklyn, there's only one container terminal over here. And chances are that the manufacturer is not located on the ground at that container terminal. It's still going to be offloaded to a truck and then driven to the facility and then distributed. So when I look at that, I think, how can anybody comply with this special permit? So that's, I'll leave it at that. But I feel like, it's worth a lot more conversation and examination to make sure that there aren't negative unintended consequences.
Yeah, and I'll just add, since we had eyes on this, we've also been talking to some of our businesses to just assess what exists out there today, but obviously a special permit doesn't impact necessarily the folks that are there today, but B, the amount of stock that's available and businesses who have come to us looking for space. So we're trying to, we can't predict the future, obviously, but we're trying to assess what, excluding like the top 3 Amazon, FedEx, UPS, like who are the companies that we care about and want to attract to the IBCs that could be impacted by this. And one, so as I kind of alluded to in my letter and also my conversations with some of you folks one-on-one, we've seen particularly since the pandemic, so much more e-commerce from our manufacturing companies and a real interest all of a sudden from urban agricultural companies who most of their space will be used for warehouse and distribution, and a small amount of their space is used for production, right? So, and they could be eventually, you know, what they're working on could be classified as a retail good. And we understand that, like, once this gets to DCP, there will be, and Chris can talk about this more, but a massive multi-year long, you know, back and forth about how to define these things. But because we're all industrial business service providers and advocates, we also know that we're going to be the ones getting questions from the companies who suspect that they will be impacted by this. So even during that process, that's what we're trying to anticipate and have concerns about. There's also companies that already do a ton of e-commerce, right? Whether it's Sahadi Fine Foods or Uncommon Goods, and those are just two in Red Hook, for example, who have 50,000 square feet of space, actually have more than that. And if a company of that similar style came in, you know, they would also be impacted, right? So, and then not to mention, on the pier over in Red Hook, for example, there's all of these condemned warehouses that are large. Some of them are 10,000 square feet, some of them are 50 or 60,000 square feet of space, or could be built out to be more. And we're actually writing a letter to the state right now, advocating for the state to invest in the piers, because we think the most critical solution to the problem of trucking is that not enough freight is happening on the water and too much is happening on our trucks. And we want to see a real ecosystem of waterfront mobility for the logistics sector happen. Like, that's my, you know, passion, dream, etc. Because without that, like, no type of legislation will stop the demand that, you know, we see from the consumer goods. So whether it's trucks, bicycles, what have you, like, deliveries are going to be happening. And anyway, so we're writing a letter to have the state invest in these piers, and eventually we would like to see more of those warehouses actually activated so that they could be used and provide great jobs for the community. And we, you know, thinking long-term into the future, having a special permit really means that only companies like Amazon, UPS, and FedEx will be able to navigate that process. So that's something we're mindful of going through this. So I wanted to highlight that, but I don't know if other folks from IJC have other concerns they want to share, or also want to make sure that everyone knows the door is open to ask us questions as well, and we can make this kind of an iterative process.
This is Charles Yu from Long Island City Partnership, also the IBSP in the Long Island City area. And, you know, one of the concerns that I would have personally is, you know, the proposal may have unintended consequences on actually creating more pollution and emission, because, you know, the demand for delivery is not going away. It's just that, you know, some of these warehouses might just move to, you know, Long Island or Westchester or Jersey. So the truck traffic is still there. It's just that the truck has to, you know, travel longer distances. And I think as Jesse mentioned it briefly, if we want to support bicycle deliveries or other kinds of cleaner and more or other more environmentally friendly kind of delivery options, we actually do need more last mile facilities to, because, you know, just bicycles can't travel as far as trucks. So you know, these are some of the things that might come back to bite us as a city in terms of the environmental justice issues in the future. So just wanted to raise that.
Cesar, I see your hand up, so I'll get to it in a few minutes. I'm gonna keep going through. Thank you to the board members. I know that you're following up with some questions, but let me, and your hands keep going up. Thank you. Jesse, is there anyone else on your side? I actually am gonna take facilitator's privilege and jump in a second, but does anyone else want to chime in after Charles?
Hi, Katie. I can jump in for
Great.
SBIDC. I work at Sunset Park. I'm not a Sunset Park resident. I'm the industrial programs manager for SBIDC, and just wanted to say, as we were trying to gather some feedback for the indirect source regulation, one of the things that we learned was that in terms of you know, workforce, we haven't done a fully fleshed analysis on whether trying to overregulate last mile and having them potentially move to other places could be a missed opportunity. I think that's important to highlight. As you guys know, SPADC runs the Workforce One Center that operates in the Brooklyn Army Terminal, and many of the placements that we've seen come up in the last months are coming from last mile logistics companies. So I think thinking about the unionization effort that happened on Staten Island and potentially more efforts like that, what if potentially down the line there could be more regulation so that last mile logistics on the workforce side could provide better jobs? So I think there's some analysis about potential missed opportunities that we haven't developed and that need to be taken into consideration when we think about workforce. So yeah, I think that's one of the things I wanted to add. Thank you.
I just wanted to chime
Thanks,
in
Kate.
really quickly.
Oh yeah, sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
Sorry about that. And just add that the clustering idea that you would restrict clustering, I could see potential problems with that, because if we are going to be switching to electric vehicle charging stations, and there's other infrastructure that may actually benefit quite substantially from clustering. And then also, obviously, you have industrial business zones and areas that are kind of dedicated to some of the heavier uses. And again, sorry, I'm Ryan from the Business Outreach Center Network. And just echoing the concern I think that we're hearing from a lot of the members of the Industrial Jobs Coalition, that there are just a lot of aspects that deserve to be looked at more carefully.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Katie. I was just going to add one additional point just on some of our concerns around just the zoning text amendment process in general, and sort of moving something forward there where there has not been consensus, and outreach to all the stakeholders, and just sort of stressing how very difficult it is to move a zoning text amendment forward where DCP is not the primary applicant. They generally, if it is a policy that they want to see move forward, as in the case of self-storage and hotels, it is something that they will take the lead on. We then had to fight to make sure it was the strongest version of that possible, but they have a lot of essentially sort of endless ability to slow that process down, make it take as long as they want to. They can ask for endless rewrites of the reasonable worst case development scenario, the environmental impact statement, the environmental assessment statement, the environmental impact statement, which would be required for something of this scale, and which takes quite a lot of capacity and resources to put together. And then ultimately, CPC has a no vote. So I think we certainly at ANHD are in support of a general strategy of trying to advance text amendments and rezonings outside of DCP, but I think making sure that everyone's aware of the real fight that takes, and the need for strong consensus, and just the sort of slog and sort of energy that can suck out of other possible approaches. So just wanted to share that point as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. My name is Quincy Elikate, Director of Industrial Business Development at the Business Outreach Center, work in Maspeth and East Brooklyn. This not self-storage, but the logistics facilities, especially in Maspeth, have increased dramatically, and as well as prices on industrial real estate, we have seen increase exponentially in the past 5 years. So this is something I think internally that we, have been trying to grapple with, and we understand that there are consequences for a lot of the smaller businesses that we really try to support. So this is, seeing that there's energy behind, trying to regulate in a certain sense the logistics facilities and the proliferation. I think that, I won't speak for the whole IGC, but for us is something that we would support. But I think we just want to make sure that it's done right and thoughtfully, in a way that has a chance to be successful across the city. I know that the pushback when we did this, basically the self-storage facilities, and we got the permit there, the pushback and the lobbying we got from that industry was massive. And I can only imagine that this, with the logistics facilities, will be even a bigger push and lobbying effort. So there will be a big fight back. So I want to make sure that if it's going forward, it's, you know, everything's buttoned up and it has a good chance to be successful. Thank you all for letting us present to you.
Great, thank you. And just sorry for the record, I know second Ryan is not Ryan. Can you say for your name again so we can get it in the minutes?
Sure. It's Ryan Cagle, C-A-G-L-E, and I work with Quincy at the Business Outreach Center Network.
Quincy, sorry, I just missed Quincy's name. Okay, great, thank you.
Sorry.
You're both logged in as Ryan, so appreciate that. All right.
Oh.
I couldn't find the link, so sorry.
It's okay. Jeremy will do the, you know.
Okay.
So I'm not seeing anyone else from Jobs Coalition. So I just want to ask Jesse, could you, we're going to turn to some questions from community board members, but I'm going to ask you to kind of summarize for us. You've outlined a couple of the responses to the special text amendment. And if you could just kind of go through those, you know, it's in summary, what are the things that, I mean, I can reflect it back and say what I've heard, but I would love for you to just do that for everyone. Your three main issues, your four main things you want to focus everyone on.
Totally happy to do that. And all right, so first I would say, I mean, you have this in my letter, but and it's a little hard because, like, as you know, folks on IJC have said, we're still really trying to like come together, and we all have really different districts. So I'm hesitant to speak for all of us, but I think broadly our concerns are that this will exacerbate the issue we're already seeing of speculation now in large warehouses, of developers building out purposefully for last mile. And we are interested, or at least SBIDC certainly is interested in exploring non-discretionary actions that DCP or DOB can take to really influence particularly the design of these facilities, so that, and discretionary meaning like a special permit is discretionary because it goes through a ULURP application. Non-discretionary is just not, you know, there's no choice. Like the developer has to do what the city says, right? And again, the maritime issue of like not building up right to the waterfront, leaving, you know, activating the piers if they happen to be on piers. So focusing on that kind of freight-based ecosystem is really key for us. And we, you know, we've chosen that, we've kind of decided that a special permit is not going to necessarily get that goal for us. That's our perspective. So yeah, speculation is one, first and foremost. Second, and these aren't necessarily in order, so forgive me, but second is, as Michaela was talking about, really thinking through the jobs that the sector provides and also what the future of those jobs are, and not being able to answer that question yet, right? Like right now we're seeing $17 to $25 an hour for a warehouse worker in a lot of these facilities. And that could change, right? That could turn to automation, or that could, you know, and start providing much more advanced career opportunities in that field. Or it could hopefully turn to like water-based mobility of goods, and that would be a whole nother sector of jobs. So having time to think through the implication for jobs long-term, inadvertently impacting companies that are not the top three, you know, Amazon, FedEx, and UPS, companies who do majority of their physical space is dedicated to distribution and warehousing, and then forcing those companies to, you know, go through a special permitting process. And someone else chime in, help me, I'm having trouble thinking on my feet. Those are our top three at least, but yeah. Cool, maybe I hit them. But others can chime in, and we also developed some talking points for this meeting, so we can share those around later. Oh, I should say too, like
Yeah.
another concern that we also faced really throughout other processes has been, public and painful lawsuits that will come up from this industry when they hear about the special permit, and that has undue impacts on like the industrial industry and industrial sector in general. But the other piece of this is like, and I was talking to the councilwoman's office about this, DCP has not always been our ally, our meaning like industrial business service providers and advocates. Like DCP has often, whenever we've kind of said, hey, can you study the industrial business zone in North Brooklyn or in Gowanus? And here are our recommended goals that we want out of this study. They will often just like totally ignore that and do something to kind of chip away at the IBC. We saw that most recently in Gowanus. So there's always a bit of, with the special permit for hotel and self-storage, those were non-industrial uses, but because this is an industrial use and we'd be inviting DCP to regulate an industrial use, there's also the concern that that could lead to further regulation and chipping away at the IBC. But that's a little bit more esoteric. So anyway.
And Jesse, I would say that also in the self-storage special permit, much of the power is given to, in Maspeth, we were just trying to fight a Home Depot did a 200,000 square foot self-storage within the IBZ. The community board voted against it, and the city council member voted it through, and city planning commission voted it through. So it gives a lot of power to the local city council member who is in power at that time. So there could be a logistics facility being built in another community member, in a community board or city council member's district that might not even be yours, but all the traffic could be coming through your community board, and you would not have the power there, I believe, the way it's written, to say that you don't want it. So I think knowing that our experience with the special permit is not a silver bullet, and it comes down to, it gets very political, and those things and it gets pushed through. So
Okay, thank you. So I know I have follow-up questions from board members and committee members. So I'm going to go to the committee members first. Sam, Nick, and then Cindy and Cesar. Sorry if I messed up the order, but Sam, Nick, Cindy, and Cesar. Sam, go first.
Sure, I'll be brief. It's just a comment and or rather a concern. One of the reasons, or the main reasons I wanted to be a part of this committee was because of the fatalities on Third Avenue related to all of this stuff. We've had a presentation a couple of meetings ago from the Assembly Person's Office, from Council, Uprose was among them, and not one of the three uttered the words pedestrian or bicyclist safety. And that to me is very concerning to me, that we're focusing, not to take away the importance of the other issues that are being presented, and I appreciate the work that everyone's doing, but I'm very concerned that we are not even mentioning at all the issue of pedestrian safety. The text amendment, I would have liked to see some meat on it with regard to pedestrian or bicyclist safety, because then we take that and wrap everything around pedestrian safety. And I think we're missing that. It's not touched on as much as it should be. And I think the focus should have been turned to pedestrian safety. And as I stated, then we wrap everything else around the pedestrian or bicyclist safety. So I think we're missing something there, but that's just my 2 cents. And I just wanted to share that, and I yield my time.
Thank you, Sam. Cindy? Or sorry, Nick, Cindy. Nick first.
Sure. I have a couple direct questions. I guess my first question would be to Leah. You had mentioned that you were concerned with the language being too broad. Do you have any language that you would propose, or would you be willing to work with everyone to kind of propose language that would further clarify the specific uses that are in question here?
I am not an attorney, so should not be relied on for this kind of expertise. What I can tell you, though, is it is hard in with New York City land use. Is the land use regulates what is allowable on a piece of property in a building. And when you get to the activity, they have a much harder time defining it. So I think that, like, right now, just with the definition of last mile warehouse, I understand that you drew inspiration from other communities that had similar legislation. I think it's probably worthwhile to see in what cases the city of New York has regulations that address both the underlying allowable set of uses, plus adds the other dimension of this specific activity. It seems to me like they just tend to pretty much go into NAICS codes to keep it clean. So I think I'm not really the guy to develop a new language, but I am a guy that can look at this and say, like, I've got businesses that we would really like to keep, like Lucky's Real Tomatoes, that would get scooped up in this, given the nature of the work that they do.
Gotcha. Thank you. My next question is really towards Jesse. In the last, let's say, 10 or so years, what have you noticed in the IBZ as the main drivers of employment for industrial jobs?
I've worked at SBIDC for 8 years, so I'll just talk about the past 8 years.
Sure.
Main drivers of the jobs. What's great about the industrial business zone is that it's so, there are so many diverse sectors. So I'm not sure there's one particular sector. I mean, we've done studies, and I wish Brady on our team was here. We've done studies like every few years, every couple of years. And I know Evergreen just did one of these. Like, we'll look at census data. There's this great resource that everyone should know about called On the Map, where you can look at jobs by sector and understand in your neighborhood, like the amount of people walk to work and what sector that they work in. So that's really a useful tool. And so we can take a look right now to see, what's going on there. Like, overall citywide manufacturing is actually a pretty small amount of the job generating uses in the city. But we know that in Sunset Park in particular, there are a massive amount of manufacturing jobs still today. So especially when I first started at SBIDC, there were so many component manufacturers, and component meaning like they're making pieces of things that go into other projects, right? Like, it's not retail goods that they're making. There are a ton of food production companies in Southwest Brooklyn as well. The meat market is a major facility down by the Brooklyn Army Terminal. So food production and assembly and distribution is a major source of jobs as well. So component manufacturing, food production and distribution. And yeah, warehouse has always been a major industry, of course. It's just New York City needs a lot of warehouse space for both retail goods but many other types of goods as well, whether it's food or medical supplies or any other construction supplies. Obviously, Camco is a massive company right down, but next to one of these, new logistics facilities, that's all construction and contracting supplies. Yeah, I don't know if that answered your question very well, but I'm happy to send you like reports we've done in the past, whether it's our BOA that focused on Red Hook or Evergreen. I think you guys just had a presentation on some.
Ooh, it's in 2 weeks.
Oh, in 2
weeks
sorry.
from tonight, people. We've got
everyone should go to that. That's gonna.
We're serving drinks.
On that.
Yeah, but we've got a research fellow, frankly, through the generosity of ANHD, that's looking at past several decades worth of economic trends in the industrial neighborhood, and he's presenting his report at a release event in 2 weeks.
One other question: what would you say would be the 3 biggest, I guess within industrial businesses, the 3 largest, sub industries that have seen growth, and then what would be the 3 that have seen decreases in employment?
I can tell you, certainly in North Brooklyn, the three manufacturing subsectors that have seen the most growth is specialty woodworking, specialty metalworking, and food production.
Yeah, I'd agree with that in Southwest Brooklyn as well.
How about
in terms of-
declines?
In terms of growth in manufacturing. What did you say, Nick?
How about declines over the same time period?
Garment.
Although that's now increasing for us in Sunset
Yeah.
Park massively,
Yeah.
especially during the pandemic with PPE. We've had a few companies, and now New York Embroidery Studio is scaling up to 500 employees. So there's growth now, but garment definitely was in a long-term decline. And
For us,
I'm just gonna jump in. Nick, if you could just summarize if there's an intent behind the questions you're asking, and then I want to be able to go to Cindy and Cesar, but just if you can.
Yeah, no, the intent is basically just trying to see how all of this fits in, because if there's not really an underlying growth, then whatever industry is the hot hand is going to take up and basically buy up real estate to move in. And so there's a reason why last mile has become such an issue, and it's because of the growth of that industry and really the lack of other industries from being the employers they once were. Back in, prior to 2000, you had 160,000, 180,000 people in the city working in some sort of manufacturing. Now it's probably down to 50,000, 60,000 citywide or something like that. The point is that you just don't have that kind of economic driver anymore in relation to the other industries of the city. Maybe the figures are a little bit off, but the point is that whatever industries are coming will provide the jobs. And so if we can't encourage industries that we want, then you're going to be left with whatever is there. That is really the point of the questioning.
Yeah, I hear that. And the only caveat I would say is that the facilities that certainly, I'm assuming we share the same concern over the same facilities, like these massive last mile centers in Red Hook mostly.
Sorry, this is Jesse. This is Community Board 7, Sunset Park. We're talking about the facility going up between 19th and 21st on 3rd Avenue, Sunset Park Industrial Park, largest of its kind. That there's other projected. So just to kind of ground everybody, and then I want to be able to jump to Cindy's questions. Yeah.
Totally. My point was, though, that all of these facilities have taken up on massive properties that have been vacant for years and years and years. And so it's not just about which industries are growing. Like, obviously, the growth of Amazon orders and last mile deliveries is the driving force behind this, but also these are all sites that we have worked, we meaning SBADC, Evergreen, all these other organizations you see here today have worked tremendously hard to try to figure out how do we, from like a public perspective, incentivize industrial uses in these vertical big properties, whether it's Industry City, whether it's the Buckeye Terminal site in Red Hook, whether it's industrial Sunset Yards or whatever between 19th and 20th, all these sites. And it's just very expensive because manufacturing today doesn't want 80,000 foot floor plans, right? Square feet for floor plans. They want like 2,000, 6,000, 10,000. So even though there's a high demand for manufacturing and manufacturing space and those jobs, those sites are just these like massive buildings, right? Or massive vacant lots that we have not been able to activate because the city is purposefully not willing to do things like limit other types of non-industrial uses in IBZs. Like, it's great. Okay, now on the table, we've got an idea for a special permit for last mile, but like we've been talking about, hey, can we get restrictions on, office space? Can we get restrictions on big box retail? Can we get restrictions on this? No. But meaning the city has said no. But so anyway, so there's like a very intentional part on the city that they could be playing to, activate these sites for other uses that we would like to see happen.
That was really the emphasis of my point, Katie, which is we're proposing a zoning restriction, which I think we all can generally agree with is needed in some form. However, there also needs to be something companion-wise to go along to incentivize uses that you do want. And that conversation has not seemed to occur yet. And that really needs to also happen because then it's less fighting uphill, because then you're also encouraging other industries to come in that maybe are more beneficial, that fit into the industrial community a little bit better, and also are possibly less hazardous to the folks that live nearby them. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Nick. What I think Jesse is saying is that the work has been going in for quite a long time to promote different types of industrial uses, and has not been successful. So we'll just kind of leave it at that. I want to keep going to questions, Cindy, and then Cesar.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, this is an extremely complicated issue, and I'm really glad that everybody's here tonight. So just a couple of things. One is that, the 197A plan and the community board stance has been, a focus on retaining the industrial sector. And part of this across the city, really, and I just, my understanding is that the manufacturing sector on average pays better than the retail sector, and that it's a really important source for people, especially who face barriers to employment. And that includes the sort of warehousing and distribution jobs that we're talking about. And I guess in preparation for this meeting, I went back and I looked at the Freight NYC report about the dire need for our city, which our region is the third largest port in the United States after Long Beach and LA. We have to somehow figure out logistics and systems in order to do intermodal shipping in a way that is not going to be detrimental to our environment. And so on one hand, I just wanted to kind of raise that as a practical reality that we have to grapple with. But I am concerned because I can think of businesses that employ hundreds and hundreds of people who do warehousing and distribution and have done it for years in Sunset Park. And so I was hoping my first question is, if Jesse could speak to this, or maybe, especially Jesse, but if there's anybody else in the Sunset Park or in the Community Board 7 district that could speak to us about what kinds of companies in our district do you think would be affected? You mentioned Uncommon Goods or Sahadi's. Could you paint a picture of any other kinds of companies in a practical sense that could potentially be affected, or even by if this were to pass in its current form?
And I'll just jump into, we do have the folks from the Last Mile Coalition who introduced the special text in terms of the size. So just to say again, I know Kevin has your hand up. I don't know if it was related to that, but we're talking about particular use, particular size. Cindy, I think you joined from the top of the meeting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So your question, I'm not interloping, but if your question is to Jesse, and then we might come back to any other points from the coalition.
Right. I would like to, I guess, do you want me to mention my other question? My other question has to do with the plan, with the city invested in this Freight NYC report. We spend all this money to research this issue and propose strategies for mobilizing sort of the maritime waterfront. Right now, we have a governor who's proposing the Interborough Express on the one intermodal shipping freight line that we have. So I'm just wondering, where did that conversation go? Because if we're going to require companies to use this maritime infrastructure, there's sort of a question around where is the thinking on that? Who's doing that work? And those of you who are industrial advocates, do you have any sort of perspective on that that you could share with us that could get, because I know barges can take trucks off the street. That's the message of Freight NYC, that report. So the question is where are we with that? Because I don't want it to have to be a choice where the smaller kind of distribution warehousing businesses just end up leaving New York City because they can't somehow move their goods in a way that makes sense. So if you could speak to that, Jesse, or anybody else that's on the call, both in terms of practical, give us a picture of what are the practicalities? Who are these businesses? Because I think there's a lot of people on this call and people who live in the district that don't necessarily know how these businesses, what they're doing, who might fall into this definition or category.
Okay, so then I'll jump in to say, we'll take that question, we'll pose it to Jesse, and then we'll turn the same question to Kevin. Go for it, Jesse.
Okay, great. And I would recommend that others from IGC jump in. I'll just briefly share that first, the special permit will impact companies not here today. So, or I mean, it could impact companies here today who want to move into a new location or whatever, but it'll impact future companies. So folks like Uncommon Goods, unless they want to grow, which they could, obviously, and that's part of the concern. You're like, you've got to anticipate, okay, who's here today who wants to grow to, up to 50,000 square feet, or who's here today that is at 50 and wants more, or new companies, right? So, but I think Uncommon Goods you bring up is a good example because they specifically, a huge component of their facility is warehouse and distribution, and they sell retail goods, right? They ship out retail goods to all over New York City, but also all over the country. So, and I think I also want to preface and say, and I thought I said this before too, like, totally understand that the zoning text amendment that you guys have written so far is going to see more iterations. Like, this is just the start of the process. And I think that's why, hopefully this is not the last conversation we'll have. That's why I said in my letter, like, before submitting the application, let's chat and hopefully we can have more conversations, because it's going to take more than an hour to like get into all the details of this. So really want to just stress that we want to be as helpful as possible here. And yeah, and also that, like, as people said at the top of the meeting, this is just one tool in the toolbox, and we can bring others and are bringing others to the table, and like hopefully we can work together on those, even if we wind up not seeing eye to eye on this one particular one, as we're doing with others already. So Uncommon Goods is a major one. I would think about. I wish we had someone from Sobro here, and I'm curious to hear from folks in Maspeth, like what kind of companies they see in their district that are already doing warehouse and distribution and could move up. I know a couple of us have food production companies of that size. Leah mentioned a tomato company in North Brooklyn. We would really want to think about some of the meat market businesses in and whether their final product is considered retail, right? Like, as Leah was mentioning, part of the challenge here is that you're regulating land use and then really leaving it up to interpretation through the ULURP process, whether or not like the rest of that definition meets that business. So ultimately it can be kind of subjective. And I think that's one of the concerns we have of a discretionary action. Yeah, let me pause and let other folks jump in as well.
So I'm going to jump to Kevin just to respond to the same question that Cindy posed.
Yeah, thank you, Katie, and thank you everyone who's raised your concerns and your questions. One I guess sector that I do want to highlight that is growing is the wind turbine industry. Uprose has proposed this grid plan. Summer, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, but there are green jobs that are on the way. We want to make sure with these facilities is that, like I said earlier, that they're good neighbors, that they're providing good, well-paying jobs, and, remind folks that, that there are trucks that are coming to these facilities that are releasing emissions, and, the folks who are working there are breathing that in. But Summer, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about the manufacturing, but about the grid plan.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I'm gonna just go quickly because I know that Hillary has some really good comments on what kind of businesses will be and will not be affected by the definition as set forth currently. So yes, that was actually some of the notes I took down from Nick's question in terms of like, what are the other industries that are coming up. We need to kind of also have the 1,000 yards there and not just talk about what type of warehousing jobs, but a lot of offshore wind jobs. The state has already committed another $500 million to offshore wind development. The city has committed with their vision report an 191 million in addition to the 57 million already dedicated. SBMT has already received 25 million in federal funds. And so there's a lot of opportunity in terms of direct and indirect industrial jobs related to clean energy. There's been a statewide workforce development and skills study conducted where there's over 1 million jobs projected to specifically be created related to offshore wind within New York City. And one of the main limiting factors that we're hearing from the industry as well from the city and the state is the shrinking industrial spaces, and that there's this overall consensus that we're trying to find local space to produce pieces, to produce parts, because right now most of the large parts are all coming from Europe and being shipped really long distances. And so, you know, in terms of like not protecting the industrial spaces for the types of industry we want to see, these jobs are, you know, a lot of the projections are saying 90,000 minimum pay in terms of these types of jobs and related jobs. And almost all the labor are going to be dictated through project labor agreements with the local unions. So these are thousands and thousands of new jobs that we're really excited about, that we want to make sure that, you know, places like Sunset Park and large industrial areas are well positioned to host these types of jobs. I'm going to stop there because there's a lot of other points that I have like responses to, but yeah, thank you.
Okay, and I just wanted to clarify, you know, I'm asking these questions because I think it's important for us to be thoughtful. Like, obviously, we all want to see more green jobs, but there's also a lot of really good paying, like good companies that are in our district, our existing district. And so it's just a question around like mindfulness of their position within the context of this, because I too am concerned about the growing sort of truck traffic and environmental issues, all that stuff. But I just want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and we're making sure that those voices are being considered. So yes, so thank you for the work everybody's doing. And question around the freight, you know, the freight side of things, if there's anybody that has perspective on that, because moving 80% of freight on a maritime perspective or using freight infrastructure on the waterfront is something that we've asked for a long time. But we don't have a whole lot of that infrastructure right now. So if anybody,
I just want to say quickly on the freight piece, we should really get together with the other folks from IJC who represent the JFK IBZ. They have a really important perspective on this because for so long also JFK was not receiving freight, and now finally the city is like pushing for that to happen. So anyway, so I just want to plug that, and freight is a much bigger conversation that we've been having for a long time now and want to continue talking about in relation to this project.
So Hillary, I'll go to you. Just want to talk about uses and impacts, and then Cesar, question, if you want to pose a question.
Thanks. This has been addressed, but I guess I'll just reiterate that this would only apply to new facilities, and so obviously not to existing facilities. And also, again, it applies to warehouses that have as their primary purpose the temporary storage and redistribution of goods, not to facilities that have as their primary purpose the retail or the selling of goods. And I also wanted to just respond briefly to Sam's question about pedestrian impacts, because the proposal would impose a requirement on last mile facilities that there not be any undue increase in pedestrian safety risks, and would require DOT, the Department of Transportation, to study those risks. So I apologize for not raising that earlier because that is a really important piece of this issue.
So I think that's quite clear. Thanks for summarizing again. I think, what do they say? You have to, hear something like 10 times until it sticks, or, at least 3 times. So new facilities and then temporary distribution, not something like retail. Cindy, is that helpful to hear that? Is there anything else that you'd want to?
Yeah, I mean, and I also think just consulting with some of these existing companies to see because there's this question about future growth and would this impact already existing businesses that want to grow here and create more jobs when they are good neighbors, so there's sort of a question I have around that.
And I just want to jump in. So what in my head?
So sorry, Leah.
Okay.
Leah, so sorry. I'm just going to jump to Cesar, who has a question. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, everyone. And yeah, look, I think this is, obviously very complicated and lots of moving parts. And I think for me, what's clear, or what seems to be clear, is that I think we're all concerned, it seems like, with very similar thing, right? So from the perspective of the community board, right, we started this conversation, as Katie mentioned, over a year ago, because we were concerned primarily around the impact that truck traffic was having on pedestrians. We also were very concerned about environmental justice, right? We're concerned about what all of this new truck traffic can mean for an environment, by the way, that's already overburdened, right? There's no question about that. We have been on record for decades as a community board around our desire to maintain a working industrial waterfront. So there's no question there that this community board has been very supportive, as evidenced by the whole industry city rezoning. That conversation really took on a huge significance for this community board because of this commitment that we have to the industrial waterfront. And I'm hearing all of those concerns echoed by the folks who presented today. Our solution is what's on the table right now, which is this text amendment. So I'm really wanting to hear. I think we are all kind of on the same page about the concerns that we have: small businesses, environment, truck traffic. But I'm really very eager to hear more around solutions and whether it's specific language that you want to see in the text amendment, or any others, right? Because I think for us, this is the time. We've been talking about this now for over a year, so this is not something that we started to talk about last month, and here we are, boom. I think Katie summarized the whole process. So this is the time for us to really consider alternatives to language, to solutions, etc. So if that's possible, that would be great. Otherwise, we need to find a way to continue to engage in this conversation. But again, I think for us, we're at the point where, and I think for all of us, we need to be mindful of not letting, the perfect be the enemy of the good. So eager to hear more.
Sorry, I know, Leah, you had jumped in. So if you want to be the person to respond to Cesar's question.
Responding to the last question, which is about the temp. And in terms of the temporary storing, right? So not warehouse and distribution for longer term, but so I see how that was written. But, I think again, the first thing that went off in my head was food distribution, particularly fresh food, all falls underneath that, right? Whether it's, it's the tomato distribution and the trucks come in and then they sort it and it goes out, it gets sorted and then goes out in sprinter vans to restaurants. Another company we have, Asian bok choy. The bok choy comes in, they do a minor amount of processing, it gets divided up and it goes out to Chinese restaurants. That's to me, that would get captured in that short term.
So I'll pose the question, just reiterate what Cesar had put out. If anyone can respond to his question. Where are we going from here? Specific text, language? Yeah.
Well, first I want to note that I have to.
I'm sorry, and just to be more clear, like, yeah, what are you asking of us, right? You wanted us to listen to your concerns, so yes, absolutely. But what else? What is the ask beyond that? Is, I guess, to be more clear, because again, we're kind of running out of time here. We've made a commitment to expanding this process a bit, but I think, we are coming up at the point where we're going to recess for the summer, and we would like to, again,
Yeah,
continue
I
to
mean,
move the needle.
look, again, like I want to be clear that in my letter, I didn't ask the community board to delay the vote. What I said was, before submitting the application to DCP, to the city, rather, to come talk to IJC and have us be part of the process. So I assume that this would not be the only time we could do that, because as we've talked about today, this is like an incredibly complicated issue that we only got eyes on recently and are developing our own response to. But we absolutely want to be, if you want us to be, we want to be part of the conversation and helping to develop language. I mean, I think that for IJC, we're not yet aligned on whether or not we would, regardless of language, be supportive of a self-storage. I mean, God, self-storage. Wow. Of a special permit for this type of warehousing, right? So, we're still trying to figure out as a coalition, do we have a unified stance on this? B, if we do, then, and we think that this is a viable solution, then yeah, we want to be a partner on language and come talk to us before submitting the application. When we first heard about this, we were told, okay, we're submitting the application regardless of CB7. And so I understood there's some urgency, and that's why I sent the letter and kind of convened this group and said, hey, let's get together and chat, blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, so that's been our direct ask this whole time. Like, hey, can we involve, and as Chris said at the start of this meeting, can we, really talk, this is not just CB7, this is a citywide text amendment. Can we get more involvement from community boards across the city on this, especially ones that have industrial business zones in them? And totally hear you all on, like, I understand you all feel confident that we can get to a place in this zoning text amendment where no other businesses that we care about will be impacted. I personally don't necessarily share that confidence, especially not right now. So that's, I think, the driving concern. But I recognize that this is the start of a long process with this particular document.
And let me jump in and just augment. We're potentially really useful allies in any sort of a citywide zoning text amendment. It's got to go to every community board. I mean, like, you guys are a community board and you have, some tentacles in nearby community boards, but like, every community board in the city, particularly the ones with industrial business zones, each of ours are going to look at us, our respective organizations, and go, what do you think? Right? Like, if there is language that we are all aligned on, we can advocate for it in communities around the city. Like, we could be a really useful ally.
And Cesar, I know you had the broader question is like, let's start talking about solutions. I have to leave, but I will say broadly, and I tried to make this clear earlier, like, SBIDC is more interested in non-discretionary actions that would impact the design of these facilities in a way that pushes certainly waterfront facilities to contribute to an ecosystem of freight mobility on the waterfront, logistics on the water. That's where we want to push really hard and spend most of our energy. And other climate solution responses to this, like, ultimately, whether or not you regulate this with a special permit or anything else, you will see these facilities, like, they're already here. First of all, like, there's so many of them that have already popped up. So we care about electrification of trucks, and not only just the electrification, because we use natural gas often to, like, generate our electricity. So that's problematic. Like, there has to be, other broad, comprehensive thoughts behind this, both for the facilities themselves and the trucks. or the vans, they're not always trucks, or the bikes, whatever they are, so we want, and then of course, like the protection of the workers and the drivers for these facilities as well. So there's a lot that's kind of more where SPIDC at least would put our energy. And then truck routes too. And we've been advocating that for a while, like especially, I know this is CV7, but truck routes in general are completely flawed. And at least in Red Hook, there is an opportunity, and this could impact the site that you're talking about on 19th to 20th Street, to route trucks so that they're going on the perimeter of the neighborhood, not necessarily down either Columbia or Van Brunt. So I'm so sorry, I have to leave. I would love, I love talking about this stuff. So happy to keep it going. IBC, it's our jam. You can tell we're all super passionate and way too obsessed with this stuff. So yeah, I'm gonna hop off, but you all have my email. It's jsolomon@spidc.org. And Michaela's on for a little bit more too, but reach out and we can continue having more conversations. I'm so sorry. I have to go.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse, for joining and organizing so many others to come. And we're going to go, we've got another question from a committee member, and then we'll go to public comment. So, but thanks, I know you have to hop off, so we'll see you soon. Okay, let's go to Cynthia.
Good evening, everybody, and I want to thank everybody that showed up and gave their, their insights and their comments and their advice. Well, my concern is, I think what Leah spoke about tonight was, submitting something with unintended, consequences, negative unintended consequences. So I think that that's one of the first things that needs to be looked at a little bit more. And another thing that Leah said to me also was that, we're not lawyers. So if we're going to be a part of, this consortium, because there's 7 other co-applicants, that are impacted just like us. And as everyone stated, every community is different. Every community doesn't have a waterfront. Every community is different. So when this text amendment goes through, it has to take all of that into account. And in terms of the pushback, I could see a lot of pushback happening, because when we're dealing with bureaucratic agencies like DCP and everybody else at DOT that tries to, throw a monkey wrench into whatever we're trying to do, we really need to, I think, fine tune a little bit more the text amendment so that, we can reduce the negative unintended consequences, because we do want to bring businesses. We don't want to lose any businesses, but we're not lawyers. So we don't really know the implications of everything that's on that paper. Now, so my question then, of course, is who is reviewing this before it goes, further?
Yeah, I'll jump in to say specifically, in response to your question about Community Board 7's responsibility. So the committee itself had said that we would support the special text amendment with legal review. Community Board 7 doesn't have a lawyer on retainer. And so we are represented by, we fall under, I'm using the right language, but it's the Brooklyn Borough President. And so they have legal counsel. So we did some outreach to George Janes, who you'll remember we worked with Industry City, not a lawyer, but a planner, who gave his insight, and but to say that wasn't able to kind of participate in the process in a formal way. But we do have outreach to going out to the borough president's office for legal review for the special text amendment. So I don't have a result on that yet to be able to share, but that is what the committee had said. I also want to say that what happens when Community Board 7 if and how Community Board 7 votes on this to move ahead, it's a series of conversations that happen with DCP in terms of defining the use. There's this, there was a meeting that already happened, but it is quite iterative, and that also comes into these questions of like how use was defined. So that is part of the process itself. I hope that's helpful, Cynthia. And
Well, but the other
yeah.
thing is that, we're kind of like this other organizations looking to come in as a group. I mean, we're being asked to be a part of this group now, so it's come to us at this point. So, Sammy mentioned that there was no mention of the safety for pedestrians, and bikers and whatever, to include those things, which are very, very essential and they're very real, to include all of that without, like holding up the show, if I may use that term. Like how much longer, like somebody said, we're going to go into summer session now. So like, what is it? What are the things that we need to do to move this forward without legal help, so that when we present it, it looks like something that other people will then come on board with?
Yeah, and I'll respond in a couple ways. So the vote for this on the special text amendment would be, it's listed in the agenda right now that we're going to come to vote on this for the June meeting. So it's June 15th. So that's like the last community board meeting that we all had on May 18th. We said we would take a moment to host this meeting that we're having right now, hear from everybody here, have a roundup, and then come back on June 15th and go to a vote. So
on June 15th, it will not include, it's just what's there now. It will not include like the safety issue or anything like that.
I would encourage everyone, again, I think we'll make sure that we refresh this to go through the special text amendment. It's what is the problem that we're trying to solve for, is the spirit of how this got created, right? So it's like looking specifically at these type of facilities, with the outcome of driving towards things like better safety, less congestion. Those are that's the outcomes that we're driving towards. Right. So this is about solving a particular problem. There's a lot of context in the proposal as well. Like there's the special text amendment itself, but then there's also a lot of context that's been provided of like, where did this come from? What are we solving for? And that includes things like local air pollution, traffic safety, and other points.
Katie, if I would say, another thing that I think that we should be very focused on, because we can go ahead and join the consortium and put in the text amendment, but I think that it would be wise for us to look at what some of those pushback situations that are going to, they're going to stifle us. They're going to hold us back, and we're going to have to keep going back and back and back. So I think that, one of the things that we should do is to like include in what the submission is going to be, whatever it is, before it's submitted, so that, we can avert some of that pushback, which clearly we're going to get in. It's not going to be an easy process.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you all.
I'm going to move to public comment. There's folks who've been super patient. I appreciate it as well. So we've got Maria, and then looks like we lost Jim. But so we're going to public comment, and then I will move to wrap up. Okay, Maria, maybe Jeremy, you can help me.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great.
We in a respectful way, we're putting 3 minutes on the clock, Maria.
Okay, no, of course. Okay, I hope my notes here will help me stay within those 3 minutes. So there's so many issues, for decades now, we have been speaking as to the viability of our protection of our industrial waterfront, all those jobs, in keeping with new technologies and whatnot. And so a number of years ago was there's nothing we can, the first thing was, oh, there's nothing we can do because they're building all of these distribution facilities as of right. Fine. So we're dealing with the street safety and traffic issue, the truck activity as in the environmental aspect of emissions, protecting our shrinking working waterfronts for use by diverse industries. I haven't heard anything, not that I'm surprised, where the city is a partner in any of this. Whether whichever administration, I'm not pointing to any one administration, all this construction is being done feed from the waterfront, feed from the water. I have not seen, and maybe I just haven't seen it and don't know about it, maybe somebody here knows, hopefully, the strengthening of our the bulkheads, so that then piers could come afterwards, and maritime freight would be, which everybody agrees is the best way to deal with, where merchandise comes in and goes out as much as possible via maritime freight. We talked about the rail line down at BAT about a couple of years ago. It was raised. It was all this hoopla about it. I'm not sure where that is at as far as freight. It seems to have picked up a more of passenger transportation. Am I missing something here? I'm really concerned. Where is the infrastructure on the waterfront that we've all talked about, that we've all agreed, that all the studies that have been done for as far back for decades now? I remember hearing about this since the 1960s in this neighborhood. More maybe the 1970s, maybe I was too young. 1960s, but by the 1970s, about what needed to be done, what was the right thing, and the same issues keep coming back. I'll stop there. Is there a piece here for infrastructure? Because if you don't have the commitment of the city for the infrastructure, a text amendment, a zoning text amendment clicks in with that. What are we zoning? That we're only zoning in and out through the streets because there isn't the infrastructure there at this moment. So we're locking ourselves into that everything is going to go in and come out via the street. Because then, what am I missing here?
Thanks, Maria. I feel like you encapsulated a lot of what we heard tonight from different speakers in terms of having coordinated planning and a vision, and that these being reoccurring issues that span beyond our years and generations. So that is almost a note that I'm going to end on. I'm missing, I don't see Chris anymore, but I just wanted to see if there's anybody from the Industrial Jobs Coalition that is still here. Maybe Quincy, I think you spoke, and Ryan. And we've got a couple of folks from the Last Mile Coalition. I want to encourage Last Mile Coalition, Industrial Jobs Coalition to have a discussion. So that is a call to action. And I don't know who from the Industrial Jobs Coalition can be the person to say that they'll take that forward. Is there anybody here?
Yeah, hi. My name's Emily. I also work at ANHD. Chris had to hop off for family responsibilities. Yes, we would be happy to have further follow-up conversations. Anyone can email, can I just say my email so people can Emily, emily.g@anhd.org, and I'd be happy to coordinate.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Emily, for putting your hand up.
I just want to encourage anybody who would like to communicate with each other. If they don't have a way to do that, feel free to reach out to the community board and we'll be happy to facilitate.
Great, thank you. So that's going to be one call to action. The call to action is, and I can see Kevin and he was shaking his head and so was Hillary. So just we'll make sure that that happens. Follow on discussion from what was shared tonight. The next follow up from this is that there were several points made. We heard there will be meeting minutes that we'll share. This will go out to the full community board. My call to action to the community board is going to be to read through the special text amendment before this vote that happens on June 15th. As you all heard, Jeremy, after June 15th, when does the community board meet again?
I have not looked at the holidays in September, so it is generally the third Wednesday. But I don't know if that will be affected by holidays. But of course, committees can meet over the summer as necessary.
Exactly. Okay, so I just want to do a little bit of previewing. So there's this IJC meeting and Last Mile Coalition coordinated discussion that's going to happen. There's going to be a meeting minutes report out from tonight, everything that we heard, that we will then have a vote on proposed vote on June 15th. And then at some point post holidays in the period that is the summer in July and August, we'll figure out when this committee will meet again, but we'll figure out a time that works for everybody. So that's some previewing of what's to come. Thank you, everybody. A lot of time and energy that went into joining tonight. So really appreciate it, and we'll follow up soon. Thank you.
Have a great night. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, everyone.
Good night.